Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I see some heads nodding, that's good. My name is Lisa Pizinovic. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Bioscience Association. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this very important conversation. We're really excited about the panelists that we have lined up for you today. It's going to be an interactive session with some breakout room activities we're going to do at the end, but we're going to give the panelists a lot of time to delve into some of the topics that are really important right now around diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace and health equity. And I know you don't want to hear from me, so I'm just going to do a few housekeeping things and then turn it right over to the panel. Big thank you to today's sponsors, Amgen and the Oregon Alliance of Clinical Researchers, for making this event possible. Also want to give a shout out to our platinum members who are very important to us, help make everything we do easier, and that's Genentech and Biotronic MSCI. And without further ado, I really want to just turn this over to our panelists, let them introduce themselves, and just dive right into this conversation. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll get started. Soundharya, I'll turn it over to you.
Happy to be here in this diversity and inclusion event. So I will start with my own introduction, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to all spend a few minutes introducing themselves and also address the question of why is this important to you? Why is this topic important to you? So my name is Soundharya Nagasubramanian. I work for a medical device manufacturer called Hillrom as a director in R&D. And I came to this country as an immigrant in 1995 to do my master's in engineering. And this topic of diversity and inclusion has been important to me my whole life. That's what has given me sort of an understanding of what's happening in communities. It's important for me, personally in opening doors for me, but also in being part of the communities. So that's why I'm here. Because it's so important to me. I also try to build diverse teams. I believe in diversity brings strength and creativity to the teams. And so it's a very important part of my team building. So Emmanuel, would you like to introduce yourself and also talk about why this is important to you?
Yes, my name is Emmanuel Akporiaye. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Veana Therapeutics. We are a clinical stage oncology company that's involved in clinical trials for cancer patients. Diversity is important to me because I believe that America is a nation of immigrants, and immigrants bring a lot of skills and innovation into this country. And if you look at where we are, a lot of the major companies in this country are either led by or have members of diverse populations at the helm. So it's important that for this, the strength of this country really relies on taking advantage of the skill sets and the experiences and talents of all members of the population.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Don, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think I can jump in. Hi, everybody. I'm Ndongo Khouma. Also go by Don. Actually, half of my life I have. I am a validation engineer at Genentech. Been working there a little over 8 years now. Been in this industry about 13 years now. Like Soundharya, yeah, I'm a immigrant to the United States. I came here in 2002, diversity and inclusion is important to me because I think more recently I have realize how much I've taken for granted the opportunities that I've had to be around diverse environments, and in an increasingly diverse world where we're all interconnected, we're noticing more and more, or it's hitting me more and more that large segments of the population are left out by legislation or policies or healthcare. Any of those things, or in general unjust treatment. So someone who I have 3 children now who are very young, and I sort of see the world through their eyes a lot. and some of the questions that they raise, you know, in terms of what makes them different from others, how they look, or perhaps their culture and things like that. I often notice that there's not enough education at that stage, or even within conglomerates like some of the companies that were mentioned here earlier. So there's plenty of opportunity for diversity and inclusion to impact people's lives and people to be educated in that space, and you know, sort of connect more and more with each other, so that we can improve everybody's life and, you know, foster belonging and make sure everyone feels valued and respected and that can live their best lives. And to me, it's probably the central aspect of why I want to be really active in this space, so that everybody can be their best selves every day and feel that they're a valued member of society.
Great, thanks, Don. Nate, you're back.
I am. I don't know where I went, but I'm certainly glad to be back with this group. I was just saying that in working at Eli Lilly, it does. I really appreciate diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's such a big part of my life. I think that it is actually a life and death part. When you look at the staggering statistics, which we'll touch on a little bit later on about the equity in our community, it literally is a life and death issue. As an African-American person and a person of color, so much of the time, depending on what zip code you live in, has a direct impact on how long you will live. Up to 10 years difference in your time of life versus a Black man's life versus a white man's life, just because of the zip code you live in. You can just look and throw a dart on a map and tell that, because of the health disparities that go on in this country. So when you say the equity and inclusion, well, we work in a business, the biosciences business, that if there is going to be some change in that, this is one of the few industries that can make a difference in that. Not taking anything away from first responders like firemen and police officers and forest rangers and that sort of thing, but because they have great jobs, but biosciences can literally change the outcomes of the lives of African Americans. My mom died 10 years probably, if not 15 years earlier than she had to, because of health disparities. And that was a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. If we could have had more African-American doctors, more African-American nurses, et cetera, who were working with them, I think it could have made a life and death change. And so I think that it's very important. It's a life and death issue for, at least for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. Second, I wanted to get all the panelists to share their stories. So all of you are successful in your careers and are here today because of that success, right? As tokens of, you know, successful minority leaders. So I thought it would be interesting for everyone to hear the story, your story. You know, how did you get here? What opportunities did you get? You know, who helped you along the way? That would be, you know, helpful for people. So I wanted to start with Don. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I moved to New York in 2002 and attended college there. And so when I reflect, at least through my journey in the career that I've had, is I think there are few central themes that at the time I certainly took for granted, but living in the Northwest and seeing perhaps the lack of diversity, especially in our field in this area, I realized that the things that I took for granted really had a significant impact on how I got here. And I remember that my college advisor in the Grove School of Engineering was a Black person, Dr. Philip Payton. And I had a grad student advisor who was a Senegalese immigrant like me. And the second internship that I you know did while I was in undergrad was an American company, and I was recruited by a woman named Deborah Thomas Lowell, and she was a Black woman who at the time was an associate director at Merck. And I remember being really impressed that she carved time out of her day to come to our campus and sit down with us and, you know, individually and talk one-on-one and tell us about the industry, you know, give us advice about our careers, answer our questions, and help us land an internship, one that ultimately translated into me working at Merck, right? And so now that I'm on this other side of the fence, I don't necessarily see as much of that anymore, like early career in recruiting, or people really investing their time to go out there and connect with especially people of color. I think it's really important when you see someone who looks like you to doing something that you want to do. It is validating. It helps you realize that you are worthy and you can do what they're doing, right? And I think in the African American community, a lot of times we have such an underrepresentation in these careers, and it translates into first generation students, for example, not having any network or connection where they know somebody who's doing something that they would like to do, right? So they often don't have that extra push or that access. And I think access is an important aspect of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when I left Merck and I came to the Northwest, I was attracted by Genentech's culture of inclusion. It was really famed for having a West Coast culture, so to speak, where it just like a community. But what I did realize when I came to Hillsborough is that really applies to the Bay Area more so than here. And a significant part of the reason is that the Oregon area is just not that diverse when it comes to people of color, right? And then so over time, I really have grown into sort of finding carve out a space for me, or at least finding a personal mission to impact the diversity at Genentech and in general in the Northwest, creating opportunities wherever I can for people of color and marginalized communities so that they can have access to the things that I had access to, so that I can mentor and pay back some of the things that I benefited from when I was, just starting out my career or getting ready to do so. So that's, at least in the context of this conversation, that's what my journey was like. And that's how I was able to get to where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly highlights how important that access and networking piece is, to get to any point in your career. So Emmanuel, what is your story?
Well, my story is that I'm a first generation immigrant. I came to this country about 43 years ago. So I do an advanced training in the biosciences. And I received my Ph.D. at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And from there, I went on to postdoctoral training at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And just to set the stage, I was just one of several students, of course, very few, maybe one or two in the Department of Microbiology where I got my Ph.D. And Dr. Carlton Stewart, who is a white man since deceased, he came to give a seminar, never knew who I was, never met me before, and he gave me a chance. I was looking for a postdoc position, and he said, why don't you come work for me? And that's how I got to Los Alamos. And I did my postdoc there, and I got my first job as an assistant professor at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. And of course, I was the only Black faculty member there. And I was there for about 5 years, got promoted as associate professor. And being an immunologist and microbiologist, I left from there and went to continue my research at the medical school in Tucson, University of Arizona in Tucson. I was there for 17 years, and I eventually rose to the position of faculty member, of full professor, as well as department head. And while I was there, I developed a drug, which is now the basis of my company. And I wanted to take that drug to the clinic. And of course, I looked for a place where they had infrastructure to do that. So that's how I came to Providence Cancer Center here in Portland in 2008. And while I was there, I ran a lab in tumor immunology and therapeutics. And my boss at the time, of course, through all of this journey, I have to say I was the only Black person in this environment. And it became clear to me from my journey that actually I've received mentoring from several white people. But in spite of that, I noticed an absence of Black people in that arena. It's kind of a rarefied environment. And of course, when I go to conferences, I'm usually the only one or just a few Black people. And it's just difficult to really penetrate. There are a lot of these societies, like the American Association of Cancer Research, they have subgroups where they have, minorities that have their own subgroup. But what I noticed that they are never highlighted, where they are seen as one of the leaders in those communities. And I think of this personally, I call it unintentional bias. That what is happening here is that the people in leadership positions, they know, have mentored each other because they're familiar with people they work with, which are mostly white people. And what we need is access, to be able to participate. And indeed, they are very smart people. If you look at the population, it's majority white, but there's a small percentage of minorities. And if you even follow those percentages, minorities should be represented in the discussions, where people make decisions. And so in as much as I'm thankful that I got what I may call non-biased mentoring by mostly white people, the fact that there are very few of us, and this environment is really a challenge. And I think you need to change this because there are talented people in all races, in all populations. And what people want is just access to succeed or fail. And that's what is lacking. So that's my journey.
Awesome. That's such an important point, Emmanuel, about the unconscious bias, but also the role of mentors, so I appreciate your comments. Nate, what would you like to say?
Well, when I was I was born in a federal housing project in East Pasco, Washington, for those of you who know Eastern Washington. And I won't take you back there except to say that I was the first generation in my family that graduated from college and was blessed enough to be able to come out of college, got a very good job coming out of college. After working in the legislature for a couple of years, got the opportunity, thank God for a guy named Senator George Fleming, who gave me the opportunity to get some experience in working in the legislature. I must admit proudly that I am an affirmative action baby, that because of affirmative action, proudly, I was able to get into the University of Washington proudly. And I say proudly because the University of Washington didn't take unqualified people because you had to be qualified to get in and certainly qualified to get out. And I was able to get in through their EOP program, utilize those services that they had, those wraparound services. Once I got out of the university, I was an affirmative action baby at Eli Lilly. And I say affirmative action because Bill Turin took a chance on me to put me in a place like Washington and Oregon and Alaska and Hawaii as my region. And he said, now you do realize that I am the Branch Ritchie of Eli Lilly, because most African Americans who do what you do, I would be looking to put you in a place like, because I do government affairs. He said, I'd be looking to put you in a place like Cleveland, Ohio, down south, in those areas where Black people, that's where you expect to put Black people to call on Black legislators. I'm going to be putting you in a place like Oregon, where you will be going to a place called Lake Oswego, or also known as Lake No Negroes. So you may get laughed at, you may get spit upon, but just like Jackie Robinson, you cannot get mad. You cannot, because if you do, Eli Lilly will say, we can never put another Black person in the Northwest. We should have never put him there in the first place. And I can tell you that I've been called some bad names. I can tell you there's been some scary nights driving across Anchorage, Alaska, and driving down to Juneau in those roads when you see a state patrol and you didn't know whether they were going to turn around and get behind you and what was going to happen. But, because I'm this affirmative action guy, I have to do my job that all my white counterparts, and I see Tim Martin on the phone. So Tim Martin and others who are on the pharma task force, they do their job too as white guys, but they get on, and some of the stresses that a person of color has that they don't have, that, you know, they can go back to the hotel and don't have to worry about some of the things that just walking down the street in Juneau, Alaska, or in Fairbanks and some of these other places in Lake Oswego, taking out white legislators to dinner that nobody else would even think about, but taking a white female legislator out to dinner that wouldn't get looked at if you were a white lobbyist, that suddenly you're a black lobbyist. It's, hey, who is this over here in Ontario, Oregon, that's taking Senator so-and-so or Representative so-and-so out to dinner? And that's when it becomes different. So my story it's kind of a different story. I like it, but it's one that is unusual, but it's one that I really enjoy doing because I set a standard that I know I carry a burden, but it's a burden that I carry proudly. And it's one that I was given an opportunity. I knew it was an affirmative action deal, but affirmative action only meant that it was a positive, as Bill Turin said when he hired me. It's a positive, an affirmative. It is a positive action. I'm taking a positive action to say, you can do this job, Nate Miles. I know you're qualified. I know you're talented. You can do it. Go do it and show them what you got. And I'm still here 25 years later.
Excellent. That is an unusual story, Nate. And we're all glad you're here, you know, so others can hear your story as well. So to piggyback on one of the comments that Emmanuel made, oftentimes when there's a discussion of how to help minorities or how to boost them, there is a pushback sometimes saying they're not qualified. What do you say to that? How can you be an ally to help minorities? Emmanuel, I want to go to you first with that question because you made a comment in your story
Yes.
which connects to that.
In fact, I'll start by saying that I have a colleague who is a white guy, good friend, very talented, MD, Ph.D., and he works with our company. And in the discussion I had with him just about a week ago, and he interacts a lot with the C-suite executives at most major biopharmers. And he said, I was just at a meeting of all these people, and there was no black person. And basically the consensus was that there are no qualified people. That's why there are no black person in that particular environment. And I go back and look at how I got here. Science, as we can see from what's going on now, is a very exact business. You have to tell the truth, you know, and you're not just accepted because people like you. You have the credentials to be part of that group. And when I was in Arizona, I ran a laboratory of students, and they came from all parts of the world. It was clear to me that these were students that were talented, a lot of them, but didn't have an opportunity, you know, to show what they could do. I taught second-year medical students. Of course, most of them were white. And most of my PhD trainees, they were all white. And in as much as I wanted to train Black students and other people of color, there were not as many of them. But my thinking was, if I was a good mentor and did a good job with my white students, that would position them to be open to training qualified minorities. And it really goes back to mentoring, because we know that no one can state here that they never got a help to get to where they are. No one. I don't care how bright you are, you got a help. Everybody needs a help. But in science or in academia, we want to find talented people to get to that position so they can eventually rise to the position of leadership. I'm aware of, you know, I was at Providence Cancer Center. We had a summer internship program that looked for the best and qualified students in Portland to come and spend, it was 2 months in the laboratory. There's an open invitation to participate, but guess what? Most of the students were white and very few people of color. It's not because they didn't want to bring them on board, but they did not look for them. They are very smart, talented people of color, students of color in this community. And I think that an extra effort, it's not good enough to be race agnostic. You have to be race conscious to see there's talent here that can make this community more vibrant. And this talent resides in all shades of color. Let's go find them and mentor them and be committed to them. And when I gave my story of a white mentor I didn't know that gave me a chance to get where I am, we need that kind of commitment to look for the best, demand the best from them, but give them an opportunity. And once they are mentored, that mentoring continues so they can eventually get to a point where they can sit at the table to participate in decision making. And I think that's what's lacking. A lot of minorities that are well trained, they get to a point and there's a glass ceiling. They can't go much higher. We need a commitment for people to mentor these individuals so they can get to that point. So the whole issue of being not qualified, to me, is one of access. There are a lot of talented people in our communities. Give them a chance, be involved in mentoring, in a way to expand the human experience, to satisfy the mentor, to bring the kind of innovation and expertise that makes this country very unique in itself. Thank you.
Excellent. That's really good, Emmanuel. I appreciate how it translates into access, which was the first point that all the panelists made here. Dawn, do you want to add on to this about how someone can be an ally to help minorities?
Yeah, I want to add on to what Emmanuel said, and I'll take my own example, or at least the environment that I work in. The function that I work for at Genentech is called validation engineering, and it's a function within the overall engineering department. And to me, it is in my experience, just perhaps since I've been in the industry, including when I was in the East Coast, it is one of the more diverse groups that I've ever been part of, and it has been so maintained that way for a very long time. And the two managers that I've had, the opportunity to work for or work with in that time are both white. So sort of, adding on to what Emmanuel said, it takes conscious, effort. It takes bold and deliberate investment in time. You need to be actually checking your unconscious bias and making sure that you're, sometimes questioning your decision-making when it comes to hiring, right? Taking some time to actually develop pipeline that will allow you to be able to hire diverse talent. I think it's a lazy argument to say that people aren't qualified, because when you look at what qualification means, it's not, a person is certainly the sum of their experiences, right? Nate and Emmanuel and myself have all mentioned being first generation college graduates. So when we think about some of the communities that we have been around, or in my case, I was very lucky in my upbringing, but I lived in pretty poor neighborhoods when I first moved to the United States. And thinking about the lack of access those people had, their communities dilapidated by mass incarceration, poverty, targeted policing, lack of access to legislation that would be representative, not being truly represented in Washington, not being represented at these companies, not having any, officer level C-suite officers that can really speak on their behalf, or people not going out and recruiting in those communities because of racial prejudice, or all these things have ultimate impact. Like the lack of wraparound services, for example, that's one of the things that Nate mentioned, that like he had access to wraparound services when he was in college, that keeps him, people like him, enrolled in college so that he can graduate, right? Like, so we have a lot of first generation students who don't actually have access to that, because they get into school, sometimes they work their butts off, multiple jobs to get to school, but all of the realities that surround them, make it difficult for them to actually make it through. And then even if you do graduate, you don't have the network, because you don't know anyone in your community that can actually help you land that first job. So you're relying on people on the other side of the fence to actually reach you. And so if people in our industry really want to be leaders in this space, we actually have to make bold and deliberate investments. We have to, do for more than just say we have a job opening. We're waiting for Black candidates to apply. We have to actually make, incentivize their application. We have to go reach them. We have to go recruit in their neighborhoods. We have to leverage people like Emmanuel or Nate or me or Soundharya or a lot of people on this call that have those connections, that come from these communities and can go back and show us like, hey, look, I do believe I'm a success story. This is how I got to where I am. There's space for you to work here. Because when we measure this by intelligence, it's not even an issue, right? So it's really access to education, it's access to services that make you more likely to be successful in school, it's access to a safety net so that you can take more chances. As a lot of people that I grew up around, just really their effort was to just survive, like not to wind up in jail, right? I lived in a neighborhood where it was drugs and shootings all the time, and this was when I was an adult going to college, right? Never mind. Think about kids who grew up in that environment. So I think that, companies often, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of, call to action, a lot of press releases of, we won't stand for this. And, I think it's time to actually, take those steps to say, okay, we will actually impact legislation that is dilapidating these neighborhoods. We will make additional investment. We will take grassroots efforts to support Black businesses. We will do what we can to ensure that fewer Black people are growing in single parent household or no parents at all, right? I think that we work for businesses, sure, but I think that even in the context of business, of dollars and cents, that I think that diversity still has a impact on the bottom line. And the company that I work for has been around for 124 years. So even if it meant a financial hit over the next few years to sort of like bring up the diversity and inclusion within the company, in the long term, when thinking about a company that's been around, has been part of society, has been really impactful to the healthcare and the health of society, and increasing longevity of people, but not impacting marginalized community in the same way, it's time for us to take a different approach, to look at a different group of people and say, okay, we spent 124 years 124 years helping these communities. Now let's reach other communities so that we're a little bit more comprehensive, we are more diverse, we have more equity, and we are more inclusive. And that it does take effort. It takes a lot of effort, and it has to be deliberate. We have to actually, in every decision that we make, we have to be able to stop and say, am I making this decision? Is this decision being impacted by my unconscious bias? Am I willing to put in the extra work to ensure that I can hire or at least interview a diverse panel of candidates?
Great. I think that was a very insightful discussion there, Don. To add on, I have another question, which I was hoping Nate could help me with. That the discussion point about the disparities in health in minorities and Blacks. For example, in the current COVID crisis, Blacks and Latinos are dying at a disproportionate rate as compared to others in the community. That has been brought up many times. How is the bioscience community and organizations like the Oregon Bioscience Association uniquely positioned to help the minorities?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think this is one of the areas where bioscience has really got a chance to make a difference. Just statistically speaking, Blacks and Hispanics are 3 times more likely than whites to get COVID. Blacks and Hispanics are twice as likely as whites to die. So, I mean, they're dying at twice the rate as whites. And then when you adjust for age, Hispanics are 4 times more likely to go to the hospital. African Americans are 5 times more likely to go to the hospital than whites. And so you can see this becomes a problem right there. Minorities only make up 40% of the US population, but however, they only participate in 20% of the clinical trials. And if we're going to have any kind of solution to this, it's going to come through having them participate in the clinical trials, because that's where the solutions are going to come from. You got to participate in the clinical trials to find some solutions. And there's a whole lot of reasons why African Americans don't want to participate in clinical trials, some hurdles that they've been trying to overcome, the industry has been trying to overcome. One of those is, and probably one of the biggest ones, is the lack of trust. As some of us on here may or may not know, there was this instance that came about this, that talks about the Tuskegee experiment. And as stunning as it may seem, a while back, there was an experiment done in Tuskegee, Alabama, where the government of the United States put some, wanted to know what would happen if syphilis went untreated. And so some African Americans did not get treatment for the syphilis that they had, and they were studied. And as a result, it caused such a impact on the minds of African Americans. Once they found out and word got out what had happened, Black people just, I mean, if you go down in the South and you talk to them today about going to the doctor, it still has an impact. About getting into clinical trials, it still has an impact. And it's just now getting to the point where many of them will get into clinical trials, but they've got to get into clinical trials because, as we talked about earlier, it has such an impact. You have African-American women, while the death rate of white women is coming down for breast cancer, for instance, it's going up. The death rate for Black women, it's going up. And so we've got to figure that out. The only way you're going to figure out what's going on there is for them to go in and start seeing their doctors earlier. Many of them are not going in to see their doctors earlier because of a number of things, like not being able to trust, that trust, and being able to trust going in to see your doctors. And so we've got to do some of that. We've got to do things like get these clinical trials closer to the community so that it's easier to go see them. We've got to talk about maybe using virtual visits now so that they don't have to travel, and some of that. Collecting less data. There's some things that we can do really that can make it easier so that these clinical trials can be less oppressive on people, and you don't have to really, they don't really have to be as difficult as they are right now. And it can really break down some of the barriers that they have going on right now. And what we can do is collect only the information that we need, gather that data, gather it, and be as thorough as we need to be without being too rigorous in what we're doing, with what we're doing. And I think it would bring people back to trusting us. I think if we've got more and more African-American people going out that look like them, that's collecting the data, I think that would help. And so recruiting more people in the community, doctors, African-American, working with the National Medical Association, the National Black Nurses Association, so that they can do some work in this area. I think doing things like that would really go a long way in helping with what we're doing. But it's really building that trust again, which will help, because the death rate, you can't have a 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 death rate under this COVID. It's just unsustainable.
Great. That was really comprehensive, Nate. So helps us understand some of where the health disparities might originate from, right? And you made some excellent points on the clinical side. Emmanuel, do you have anything you would like to add to this topic on the health disparity?
Yes, I would like to add to the topic. One of them is the fact of value. If people of color are valued, it just makes common sense that we want to broaden, the society to gain the benefits of current therapies. I belong to societies where, the oncology type societies that want to seek and, enroll patients in clinical trials. And one of the complaints when I'm at meetings at NIH is that we don't have enough minorities to enroll. They're just not enough because we can't find them. Well, they're there. And in fact, they could benefit from such therapies, not only because, at least economically, you know, I have a greater population of people you're serving. So when you prescribe your drugs, it's not just prescribed for white people. In fact, a couple of days ago, there was a young man, undergraduate, a medical student in the UK. He said that when they treat patients in the UK, the physicians use white criteria. One example is your lips turn blue, you know, and it goes, the number of misdiagnoses of Black people because of their skin color, they respond differently to several things. So he partnered with these white, you know, physicians to write a book of the unique, you know, characteristics of people of color so that they can be diagnosed, you know, correctly and accurately for treatment. Now, COVID, I know that there are 3 companies that are going to enroll 30,000 patients for a phase 3 trial. That's 120,000 patients. Most people afflicted by COVID are people of color. So you have a vast pool there to tap into. The question is, why is that not happening? You know, these populations have been so marginalized, they need to be incentivized. You know, Nate mentioned trust. That's one of them. The other reason is economic disparity. They don't have the means. I mean, most of these trials are done in big cancer centers. They don't have transportation, you know, they don't have money, they don't have cars to get there. And I think we need to take this to be successful, take these treatments to them. Community clinics where they reside, doctors that can participate in this, and also include, you know, there are a lot of minority physicians that do clinical trials. Include these people when in a position of leadership so they can come to the table. As Nate said, when you see a Black person or person of color go into such a community, they're more trusting than if you have a lot of well-meaning white people that go there because the history, you know, is really tainted. So I think this access has to be seen as, you know, not only for humanity, but it's economic. I mean, think of all the commercials we watch on TV. I buy a lot of products, but all the commercials are with white people. Imagine if they just took the extra effort, these companies, to have commercials where they feature Black people or people of color. They now feel that they have ownership. And I tell you, they make more money. So at several levels, the need to include minorities in clinical trials is so important to benefit society. And one more point, we talk about personalized medicine, which is treat patients based on, you know, their genetics. Well, some genetics are common because we're all humans. Some mutations are the same. But the way you can find out is by expanding your population that you treat. So there's no statistics to say, okay, this treatment will work for this population because we've investigated it. A lot of the treatments are based on majority who happen to be white that are enrolled in these clinical trials. So that should be an effort. I have to go back to say you cannot be race agnostic. You have to be race conscious and want to go and find these people because they just, you know, bolster your trials. It's more comprehensive, it's more robust, and it benefits the majority of the population.
Excellent. That was a great summary of what the biosciences community can do to help. And, you know, I'm so glad to hear of the many different approaches that can help in the white population. Before we go to the audience questions, I did want to give the other 3 panelists a chance to provide any closing comments, anything you definitely want to communicate to this audience that's important for today's discussion.
One of the things that I'd just like to touch on is 2 things. One, when we just finished up and talking about what could be done, I just wanted to just show if a company really wants to do something. I was just looking at Eli Lilly. 62% of the population is white. 61% of our clinical trials is white. 13% of the population is Black. 11% of our clinical trials is Black, because Lilly has made a conscious decision that our clinical trials is going to look like America. And, you know, I mean, I know I'm scratching our back, but because, you know, I work for the company, but there's enough people inside when they made a commitment to that. If you make a commitment to something, that's what you'll do. And so that's one of the ways that you have to do it. And is to really, truly make a commitment. It comes from the top. And when you make it from the top, our CEO, it goes all the way to the bottom, because everybody wants to do what the boss has said that they want to do. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to hiring people and getting people that look like Emmanuel and Don and so forth, put it in their pay package. You will do what is in your wallet. I'm telling you, if you make it part of people's compensation, it's one of the quickest ways you can diversify your staff and do everything else. If that's one of the goals that you have, make it part of your incentives, and it'll change. It will change very quickly if people are being paid to do that. And as Forrest Gump said, that's all I'll say about that.
So if I may add to Nate's comments, this conversation should not be seen as adversarial. I've always made the point that it's not a Black or people of color issue, it's a white issue. And that's not supposed to indicate it's adversarial. We have the majority of, of the population is white. The majority of leaders in all sectors of the economy is white. So we need to partner with them. We need to raise their consciousness to recognize that minorities are valued. They bring talents, they bring expertise that will make a society more functional. It makes more economic sense. And to reach out to these people, it cannot be mandated, because then it's like Black Lives Matter. We don't want it to go away because companies are donating money here and there. Is it for real? Is it for the long haul? So we need sensitivity and understanding by the majority population, the white population, that there's a segment of society that is not being taken advantage, that would benefit the society, make it stronger, more innovative, and for humanity too, that this needs to be broadened. So I think that is the one point I want to make, that let's try to lift everyone to make this a more robust and dynamic society. I came here from Nigeria because this is a land of opportunity. And I always say it in very simple terms. It doesn't matter if you're Black, green, or red. If you can make money for General Motors, they make you president. It's the bottom line. It's a capitalist society. There's so much talent in all populations. Let's take advantage of those talents and, get the best out of them and to benefit the society as a whole.
Great. Don, you want to add on any closing comments?
I'll add one quick thing. One, I'll just do sort of emphasize or amplify what Nate just said. I think accountability is a big piece of this. If there's the messages that we see of support, find one thing that you can do, build a habit around D&I, and then for companies, holding people accountable. And I he says pay package, and I was thinking in terms of job responsibilities. If you are a people leader, your organization over time should be reflective of the larger US population. And I wouldn't even stop at available market, right? But the other thing that I wanted to really add on is that all these things that we're talking about in terms of people being valued, respected, included, at the bottom of it is human dignity. Everybody deserves that. Doesn't matter where what your background is. And we reflect on various creative ways and in different spaces where we can have impact on improving the lives of people of color. But there's a bigger issue, essentially. Like we're taking segments where we can have an impact, and I think the bioscience industry has a significant role to play. But the reason that role is so important is that it has cascading effect on the lives of people, right? People are being mass incarcerated. People are being killed on the streets. People are being targeted, right? By whether it's legislation or police, or are being ignored and not being given the voice, a voice in what is happening in the country. They're not given the dignity that they deserve. They're not being told that they're valued. So, even as we discuss this and we start moving away from, protests, you're seeing fewer protests on TV. Remember that there are people who are, what you see on TV, Nate was saying the other day, we've been living this, right? It wasn't, George Floyd was nothing new to most Black people. Like, I didn't watch on TV and say, oh my God, right? It happened. It's been happening in our communities for a long time. Right? Don't let that picture, get erased out of your mind as you go back to the normal day-to-day life. Because those decisions that you're making at work, make that conscious effort you're making to hire more people of color impacts the life of these people. Like it impacts my life. It makes him less likely that my son will be pulled over by police and killed on the streets. It really, really does. Right? At the bottom of it, that's what the impact is, that this might save my son's life.
Yep, that's a powerful closing line, Don. So I appreciate all the panelists' comments and discussion. We have time for a few questions before we do the breakout. So I'm just going to go in order in the chat session. I saw a few questions. The first question was on recruiting. While most recruiting happens at universities, has any recruiting for future interns ever been done at high schools that have a high population of racial minorities? Or has there been partnership formation with local organizations that work with minorities? Don, I know you talked about recruiting, so I'm gonna ask you if you have any answers for that question.
Yeah, actually, at Hillsboro here in Oregon, our site has partnered with local high schools on a couple of recruiting activities. One, actually, the Genentech Women's Professional has hosted a couple of career days where they help students, they invite high school students over to our sites. They do a tour, give them tips on building resume, and have a few science activities, sort of introduce them to the possibilities, right? Like raise their awareness in this space. And Genentech also has a couple of programs where they partner with high schools for sort of, a career path to apprenticeship where they can actually come and work in biotech eventually. But I like that question, because what we've been reflecting a lot is that, can we even go further than that? Like, can we go, to middle schools, right? How do we get more girls interested in STEM, right? Like, but you have to start early. If you wait till high school, they already probably made up their mind about what direction they want to have their career, or society has impacted them so much that it's all sort of like, reduces their chances. They haven't had those wraparound services. They haven't had a mentor in their life to kind of guide them towards a successful career, right? So we've been, and I don't know that any effort has really been made in this space, but we've been reflecting some of the ERG groups at Genentech, like GWP and Medley, which I am chair of. We've been reflecting on how can we go even further than high school and recruit much earlier, and partner with organizations so we can mentor middle school students.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and my company Hillrom does that as well, in terms of partnering to see how we can help mentor high school students, as well as students of or employees, kids that can come in for apprenticeship, and that helps with bringing them and mentoring them. The next question is on, Emmanuel, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say that universities also, several universities in the country, they do have internship programs to bring minority high school students, to the universities to train, usually in summer programs. But, my experience in participating in these things is that most of the students come in not as prepared, not because they're not intelligent, not as prepared because, as high school students, they never had the resources. to compete. I mean, they don't have computers, they don't have access to school. They come from, sometimes dysfunctional homes. So there's talent there. It just needs the kind of mentoring to take them to the next level. And that means a commitment to realize that these students are valued. When they become successful, society benefits more, and they should put more effort into those enterprises, not just for namesake. So we're trying to get minority students in the summer. Where do they go from there when they finish the summer programs?
I wanted to pose one more question to the panelists that I did see in the chat. For the benefit of legislators who might be on the line now or view this video later, what specific things can they do to affect positive change, and how do we seize the moment? We have a summit coming up in a couple of months, and I think this will be great information that we can feed back to those folks. And I'm just curious if anybody on the panel has just 1 minute each maybe to spend on that topic.
I do know that OBA has access to the legislature and to government leaders. And I think that I'm sure they make the best case for minorities as best as they can. But I think including minority members in leadership positions where they can be seen and heard, and they can make the case, and also to create an environment at OBA where mentorship for some of these individuals or companies by their more experienced, white colleagues that have been successful in biotech can be participants in this process. And I think OBA should really make an effort to see that. You cannot mandate people to do things. You have to make them understand the value of it and how to benefit from it. And always go back to humanity and dignity and the fact that if everybody's involved, you have a stronger society, a more innovative society, a more inclusive society that takes advantage of all the talents and skills of different members of that population.
One of the main things that they can do, and Don hit on it earlier, is to work with the Oregon Teachers Association at a very early age to work with those kids to close the education gap. Because if you can't do math and you can't do algebra at 8th grade, basically technology is not going to be a pathway that you get in, and the sciences are not going to be a pathway that you get into. But forcing them to say and getting the teachers to close that education gap or achievement gap or opportunity gap that they say is going to be something that the educators are that the legislators are going to have a real serious talk with some of their biggest supporters and say, this is going to be something that we want to do for these Black and brown students. And that's a very difficult conversation, but that's one, because that's where the young doctors and the young nurses are going to start. This is not going to be a problem that is solved overnight. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. So people are going to have to dig in for the long haul. Call it what it is. This is systemic racism. And until people can deal with that and understand this is systemic racism, and Emmanuel, to your point, this is not a conflict deal. This is systemic racism that is long time coming, and we've got to dig out of it, but we can only dig out of it together. If all of us deal with it together, we can dig out of this. This is not something that's unachievable. We can get out of it together. Let's help train kids and train them in math, and they'll be fine.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, what we wanted to do was use this panel conversation as a jumping off point, break us up into smaller groups where we can have a little bit of dialogue. We don't have a whole lot of time to dedicate to this, but just get the conversation started about what each of us can do personally to affect change. And so we've got a couple of questions that we want everyone to be thinking about. And ideally, once we get into those breakout rooms, everybody just answers one of those questions and or speaks about something that's on their mind relevant to today's topic. So the questions are, what can I do as an ally to show up for disadvantaged or marginalized groups when it comes to healthcare equity or general diversity and inclusion? What is preventing me from taking a more active role in this space? So those are two questions that we have. When you get in your rooms, your facilitators might add one more, or you can certainly share something specific that's on your mind. And then we'll come back together and do a quick sharing out and wrap up today's session.
We'll go ahead and get started. And as a reminder, we are recording the breakout sessions as well. And I want to just quickly introduce myself. My name is Diane Danowski-Smith. I've worked with Oregon Bio for a really, really ridiculously long time. I work with Nate Miles and others to work on public policy and some of the marketing and membership outreach and lots of good stuff. So I've been asked to kind of help the conversation today, or just to talk about the questions. And this is a great time for all of us to have a real robust discussion about some of the issues you heard today. So we have a couple set questions, but my first, and certainly Nate and others, everybody, feel free. This is an open conversation. So feel free to jump in, and we may talk over each other, but technology will figure it out. So we want to, number one, thank you for being a part of today's conversation. So the first question I want to ask is, what did you hear so far today that resonated with you, that that sort of threw up a flag for you, maybe gave you a revelation, or something you hadn't heard before and you hadn't considered? You have to unmute yourself. Don't forget if you want to talk.
I'll share.
Okay, Doug.
My name is Radhika.
Yeah, oh yeah, David, please.
Oh, so my name is Radhika. I don't know why it's showing up as David. My team member actually just brought it up to me. My name is Radhika. David is my team member who's in my team, so I don't know what's going on, but I'll be David today. But okay. I really liked everything that was shared today, all of the personal stories that came from the panelists, and I resonate with each one of them because I am an immigrant myself. I moved here in 2000. I did attend middle school, high school, college, my university here. I haven't personally firsthand experienced racism personally. I think even when I did, I had the group of friends who were always very overprotective about me. So they always stood up for me, and I never really had to take a stand. However, as I was growing up, I did realize that there were comments made about certain groups, or there were comments that were made about even like my parents. I mean, my dad is an engineer, he works for Intel. However, there's an accent that he has. And I definitely think that, you know, Indian accent is definitely something that's talked about a lot. People bring it up, and I get it a lot where when I'm talking to patients even, they'll be like, hey, what are you like? You know, you don't really like, I can't really understand like your accent, like where are you from? And I tell them I'm from India, and they're so surprised that they're like, wait, really? Like you don't sound Indian at all. And just like, even though that may sound like a positive comment because they understand what I'm saying, to me, I understand that it's kind of like a comment that's being made about my community that maybe people are having a hard time understanding when people are talking. And, you know, it's, they brought it up where they said that this is a conversation that's been happening over the years and it's not going to stop. But I think what we're doing right now is acknowledging and that this is a problem. I think that's the start, right? It's where you begin, because understanding that you need to acknowledge that there is a problem with how the communities are being treated, or how everyone, you know, might be going around making comments that they might not even know that could be discriminatory. I also think like educating someone. So I do that a lot where sometimes people will ask me questions about my culture, and they'll be like, hey, why don't you eat cow? And they might make a comment about what they've learned on TV or what media is showing them. And I just have to educate them, like, actually, this is a real reason. And I think I try to keep an open mind. I don't try to take it offensive. I try to just keep an open mind and say, hey, you know what? It's about me educating them, because they might not even know. It might be because of how they were raised or the community they've been brought up in. And I think it's important to be aware as an immigrant on my own end that I need to keep an open mind, that what I can do on my end is just educate the other communities who may not know much about my culture or about my community background as well.
So in many ways,
those are really good thoughts. Doug, yes.
I think so much of that is so embedded in the systemic racism in this country. So I think you will be surprised that even if you're not of an immigrant family, for instance, I've been here 4 generations, so that's longer than a lot of so-called Americans. And yet, personally, my experiences with the BLM movement, what it actually caused me to do is suddenly reflect back in time with all the things that had happened to me that you just tended to overlook particularly for the Japanese Americans, the tendency was, well, I can't do anything about it, so I'm not going to fuss about it. So you just sort of move on. But as you get older, or you get a little more, a lot of us are introverts at one point in our lives, and once you get past that, you start realizing that you do have the power to stand up and do something about these things. But I think, I guess the first thing that you have to overcome is the fact that you're just not going to let this hinder your progress. Of course, you have other things to overcome, but the personal aspect, as you decide, you are just going to move on and do what you have to do, and fight the adversity or wherever it is. I think part of the challenge in the diversity thing is what level of diversity is actually recognized. So today is a lot of, the world is black and white. And I like the Walt Disney approach, the wonderful world of color, because there's a lot more to the world than black and white. Black and white is kind of boring if you think about it. You want a lot of color and variety. That's where the diversity is a great value. So I think that's the position that at least some of us have to take. Otherwise, we'd all be stuck in our little hovel someplace and not doing anything in the world.
So those are good comments. So and anyone else that chats throughout this time, feel free to answer any of the questions in any order, but I do want to prompt us with one particular question because we're all being challenged to change. And if you've been following our Twitter feed this morning, the hashtag that we've been putting up there is called not only culture change, but change in general. And so how are we changing? So I'm going to put a question out to everyone. And even if your picture isn't showing up and you're only joining us by phone, you may still get called on. So we don't want to put you on the spot. So please volunteer first. So the question is, what can I do as an ally to show up for disadvantaged or marginalized groups when it comes to healthcare equity or general diversity, equity, and inclusion? So whether you're talking about in your employment or for your family or among your networks and your colleagues and your friend circle, I want us to sort of feel like we can walk away with a commitment, because if we have more conversations like this and we have more commitments, then change can and will happen. So so I'm going to call on somebody to start. I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Aisha, do you mind if I'm pronouncing it right? Aisha, am I pronouncing it correctly?
It's Aisha.
Yeah, Aisha, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why don't you get us started? I think you had some things to say.
Okay. Yeah, so not so much of an ally. I mean, this directly affects me, my daily life. So I think the biggest thing for me, working in a place that's very dominantly white or not Black, the biggest thing that I can do is just continue to speak up and continue to, like Nate said, I really want to thank Nate also, because so much of the time this conversation is brought about, it's tiptoed around, and he called out for exactly what it was, systemic racism. So I think one thing that I can definitely do is just speaking up, not being afraid, getting these conversations going, and also instead of just having conversations, having action items that we can work on. And I think that's a really huge thing. Conversations are great, but it only goes so far if you're not going to have any type of what can we take from this, and why is this important? What can we do from here? So that's my input.
That's fantastic. Okay, let's see. Anyone else want to volunteer? I may call on you if you don't volunteer.
I can volunteer.
Vanessa. Go ahead, Vanessa, and then Athena will do you second. Go ahead, okay. Vanessa. Yeah.
So I think for me is also educating myself. I'm starting to read a lot of books that are coming out about Black history, but also one that I just finished was The World Between the World and Me. I don't remember the author's name, but it reads as a letter to his son and on his experience growing up Black, and it was very eye-opening. I am Hispanic, and even though I was born a U.S. citizen because I come from a U.S. territory, and many times I've been treated as an immigrant. So I can relate a little bit to it. The one comment that really bugs me is when people ask me where I'm from, and I'm from Puerto Rico. It's like, oh, you don't look like one, but you have the accent. What am I supposed to look like? But I think the biggest thing we can do for as allies is also educating ourselves and speaking up. When you hear something that doesn't make sense or you hear something that didn't sound right, just speak up.
Yeah, that's the running theme today. Okay, Athena, you were next.
Well, I think one thing that I've kind of recently recommitted myself to, so I'm in an interesting position because I work for a staffing agency that specializes in science and clinical positions. So being a partner with candidates, really making sure that you listen to their stories and the types of job opportunities that they want and career paths, and being an advocate to them for hiring managers and companies that they want to target. And being able to be in a position to advocate why this certain person, you know, what strengths they bring to the table, where maybe they might have some skills lacking, you know, being able to really just connect people with the right opportunities as well. And making sure that the recruiting efforts are diverse so that you're dipping into different pools of different people, tapping into different resources and attracting people to want to, you know, go the route of maybe science and clinical positions.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, who else? I'm probably going to put Jody McNanny on the spot here. Jody, are you there? Jody, you're still muted. If you're talking, Jody, you're muted. Okay, she may not be able to hear us. Okay, Riley, are you there? Hello, Riley. Yes.
Hi, yes.
Riley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I am actually on the same team as Radhika, and I work a lot with patient calls. And definitely in a working environment, we do have a very diverse working environment. So I am definitely very grateful for that, for the open environment that we have, as well as the openness for everyone to have these types of conversations. I feel like something that I can do personally, like everyone has said, is just to make sure I am educated on the current events and what I can do to provide my support. And for instances when I guess questions do come up with my culture, because I am an immigrant too, is also just to make sure they're educated and not, I guess, take offense immediately when someone may say something that feels offensive to me, but they may not be aware of on their end. And I guess the most important thing is just the willingness to spend time and effort to actually learn about everything that I can be, and have the open-mindedness to be willing to speak about those conversations.
Yes, and you know, that's the theme I'm picking up today, is really a willingness to speak up and stand up. Stand up, speak up, be counted. Yes. Okay, let's see. Lakaya Green. Please give me.
Lakia. Oh,
Lakia, thank you for giving me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for giving me mercy in pronouncing your name.
It's a complicated name sometimes. I completely understand. Same thing with everyone else, especially Aisha. I'm speaking up more. You know, it's something that directly affects me and has affected me my whole life, but it's not something I usually talked about before because it didn't feel like anybody really wanted to listen or to continue the conversation. But since everything that has been happening now, I made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. So having these discussions with friends that I wasn't before, having these discussions with my family, I'm educating myself even more so I'm able to offer resources to others on how they can educate themselves. That's mostly what I've been doing. And me and Aisha are also on the same team. And in our department, it's not very diverse. It is a higher white population. And the issues were being tiptoed around this whole time. And it felt like it wasn't brought up until the people of color in our department started speaking up. Specifically Aisha, she sent an email out and it was amazing and things started happening. So thank you to Aisha for that. But that's what I've been doing recently.
It takes some bravery, I think.
It does.
It does. It does. Not only peer-to-peer bravery, but you know, in the pecking order, if you will. Mandy, you want to say anything? You want to add to this?
Well, I guess, I'm also on the same team as Lakia and Aisha. So I'm just really proud of just like everyone just like, you know, bring more light to this, you know, oh, sorry, I'm really bad at public speaking, but it's just like, so I'm like just really proud of everyone that has spoken up like in this meeting, and just, it's also like, I do agree that's very important to like educate ourselves and just like provide like support. And this is just probably like, the more we do this, the more, I don't know, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'm really bad at public speaking, but yeah, sorry.
No, you're doing great. No, you're doing great. Gordine, am I pronouncing it right? Gordine, you want to say anything?
It's Gordivan, but my name is Nadia. Yeah, so it's Nadia Gordivan, my last name. Don't know why. I am first generation American. I have dealt with a little bit of what the movement is all about, but I can't, there's no contest. Everyone deserves to live in this world freely and equally. Sorry, I'm pretty bad at public speaking as well.
No,
but
you're doing fine.
I guess the most important part is making it, how do I say this? Not easier to talk about, but bring it up more. Make it well known. Make sure that everyone's not scared to voice their opinions. I feel like that's the only way to open and challenge individuals to think differently and change their opinions and perspectives.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. So Jody, are you there? I'm going to give you one more opportunity. Jody McNanny. Jody. Okay, good. And then Mandy, did you speak out yet? Did you want to add anything? If you can hear us. Okay, Mandy. Yep, there you are.
Sorry, I'm really bad with public speaking. But
No,
I do
like,
right. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I just really appreciate like bringing this more into like, because this isn't something new, but just the fact that everyone is like speaking up about it is just something that's like a step in like the right direction. It's basically summarizing what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for adding that in. So some of us, I know, it's our job, if you will, to bring the DEI issues to our workplace. For example, Nate. Nate represents as policy work for Eli Lilly and Company. And so he is charged with raising the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion continually, and has helped his company do amazing strategic initiatives around health disparity. So Nate, I'm going to ask you this question to be fair. You'll have to unmute yourself. Don't forget, Nate. So Nate, tell us a couple good examples that you're most proud of for where you've shown up for disadvantaged or marginalized populations when it comes to healthcare inequities. I know you have some great examples you can share that might inspire some of us.
Well, a couple is we did some stuff when it relates to the African-American community where they have high levels of diabetes, and about 3 to 1 to the general population of diabetes. And one of the places that they look for to get information for healthcare is at their churches. And Eli Lilly, very uncomfortable talking about, churches, well, and religion. Well, I went into our bosses and said, you know what might be a good idea? Since we don't have anyone going into churches, but we would like to get more of the African-American community engaged in this, what if we put together a culturally sensitive program that we could take into the churches and partner with them so that we had someone going in that could tell them, because right now, as I said in my earlier deal, my mom died of diabetes and way earlier than she should have had to. Very much in church every Sunday. She had a drug problem. and she gave me a drug problem. That means she drugged me to church on Sunday. She drugged me to church on she drugged me to church on Saturday. So I had this drug problem, okay? And so that was just mama. She went to church as often as she could, and she drugged me along with her. So if we go to church with and tell these people about medications, it might help us. So we put together a culturally sensitive program that during the church service, right before they get into the heart of the service, we had somebody from the congregation who was a healthcare professional who got up and said, you know, the Bible says that the body is a temple. Amen, amen. You know, because in Black churches, it's call and respond. The Bible is body is a temple. Amen, amen. And the Bible and God wants to take care of our body. Amen, amen. And so if you want to take care of your body, what you need to do is you need to do diet and exercise. Amen, amen. But if you don't take care of your body, you're going to wind up with diabetes. And if you do, make sure that you're doing it right, that you don't skip your diet, because that's like not even taking it. And so they gave this thing, it's about 7 or 8 minutes was the proposal, was the presentation. And then we tied it in with our free medication program, or our diabetes, it wasn't free, it's our diabetes solution center. So that if you have questions about it or you can't afford your medication, call our diabetes solution center, because of a lot of those people were low income and couldn't afford their medication. So we tied it together in one package so that they could do it. And the churches loved it because we helped find ways that they could have a sponsor inside of their organization. Lilly loved it because it gave us a way to get information out about the medications that we have. And so it was kind of a win-win for everybody. I loved it. It was just too late for my mom, who died of diabetes earlier. I wish she would have had it and got some information on it, or some places she could have got her medication on it. Did something very similar to the First Nations people up in Alaska, because they have tremendous levels, and the Latinos as well. So we're putting together the same thing in the Latinx community, because they have the same issues, you know, with health disparities. And so that has probably been the biggest thing that I've been able to do, and it's big. But you know, but as Aisha said, being able to get the company comfortable with saying the word racism, it's why so many people, especially Caucasian people, are just now understanding what we've understood for a while. When these guys, George Floyd and Breonna, get killed, we say their name. Say their name, because we do not want these people to go just as another number, just as another person killed. Say their name.
Right.
It meant something to us, meant something to our community. Say their name. And the same thing in our community, these people dying of diabetes and all, they don't have to. And so
yes.
we have this thing that says, say their name. We want to be able to put it up. We want to go in there in our communities and say something. So we want to say what it is. It's racism. It's not equity and inclusion. It's not just, you can give it a nice, pretty name. It's racism. Down deep, ingrained in this society, not taking care of our people, not educating our people. When what did you say your name was? Not David, but
Radhika.
Radhika. It's like what the guy was saying when he says to you, it's like they say to me all the time, you're so articulate, you know? Hey, yeah, sure you are. You know, you don't have an accent. You don't sound like the rest of those Indians. You know, you don't sound like the rest of those Negroes. You're articulate.
And Nate, we're going to go back to the main room in 30 seconds. So I just want to give you a 30-second warning.
So it's that one thing that, you know, that we've got to, whether it's the insult that was meant as a compliment, but they don't even realize they insulted you. But you know, but give us what we need, which is honor us and respect us for what we're out here doing. Respect our brains. Respect what Lakea is doing down here at her job. That's all we're asking you for.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Black with Oregon Bio, and welcome to the breakout session. We've got a little less than 25 minutes right now, so we want to really make sure that we make the most of that time. We've got a couple of questions that Lisa had shared with us, so I'm going to put those in the chat. And we want to make this an open dialogue. So please feel free to jump in and answer one of the questions or share an experience. Just really appreciate the participation of everyone here. And you're welcome to mute yourself until you're ready to speak, but we would really like to see videos on if at all possible, and just what everyone is comfortable with. So as Lisa mentioned, the first question is, what can I do as an ally to show up for disadvantaged and marginalized groups when it comes to healthcare equity or general diversity, equity, and inclusion?
This is Andrew. I'll jump in on this one. And I think this is a really great question, I feel, because it's sort of central, especially, you know, I'm a native Oregonian. I've grown up here. I lived my whole life here. I'm obviously an adult white male. So I've grown up in this environment that really does, in many ways, have a lack of diversity around it. And being here, it, you know, you go about your sort of everyday life, and in many cases, you just don't see, you know, a lot of the racism either going on around you, or that it's sort of in, you know, front and center sort of amongst you. But you know, living in an area with a population that, you know, is majority white and you know, sort of has these sort of challenges, you know, what to do, right? I mean, beyond and Emmanuel, I really appreciate your comments about, you know, being conscious. I guess it's, to me, it's getting to a greater and heightened level of consciousness in a community where you don't see as much of it going on sort of around you. I live in Lake Oswego, right? We don't have racial clashes often going on in sort of the streets of Lake Oswego. They might be going on behind the scenes, and the racism is certainly here, but it doesn't sort of tend to be, you know, in your face that much. So, you know, other than being sort of a good citizen, you know, trying to be consciously and intelligently voting, trying to, in your own life, you know, recognize your own biases and whatnot, and sort of be a good person. Above and beyond all that, this is, I think, a really challenging and central question for me personally is, you know, what can I do, right? I mean, how to get started at being more conscious, and then frankly being more proactive. And it's, I'd love to hear some, Emmanuel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but I'd certainly love to, within this group too, if there's other folks that struggle with it.
Thank you, Andrew, for, you know, addressing this issue. You know, I live in the rarefied air of being a high academic, you know, so I don't interact very much with minorities. You know, in fact, most of my friends are white, simply because, you know, I've not. And the conversation right now, I say, is white people that can drive it. And just by being race conscious, you know, I've lived in Oregon for 12 years, and I'm really impressed that for a very white population, there's so much awareness to racial injustice. That's very unique and very, very impressive. I think what, you know, my white colleagues can do is to educate other white people to say, look, when we say Black Lives Matter, white lives matter. Every life matters. But to just face up to the fact that there's injustice, we're not blaming them. It's what they're seeing now. To educate your friends. I mean, we talk about the police. Not all police are bad. They're very good ones. Policemen have families that would defend them when they can. So the education needs to be, you know, this is not a threat. It's going to make us all better. It's just humanity. You know, educate your friends that it's not that white lives don't matter. They really matter. Every life matters. We're trying to just raise the level of, you know, of acknowledgement, not blaming white, you know, Black, you know, white people like you. I mean, you didn't, you know, it's a long history, but you're not part of that history individually. But I think that this happens to Black people all the time. I mean, I'm the only one that lives in my neighborhood right now. I'm not a Black person. Okay, I take my dog for a walk. I don't feel threatened. but I recognize that I'm the only Black person there. And it's just because a lot of Black people, they don't have the economic, economics to be able to move into environments like this, and it will take time. So we just need acknowledgement and really true support for white people, not to feel threatened, but to believe that this is just dignity, humanity, and it's a benefit to all of us. We get a stronger society, a better society, a more democratic society that makes more money, because this is a capitalist society after all. So the more people you include in the conversation, in participation, the better the outcome or the yield from it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've become probably more and more conscious of as a medical researcher is the data disparity in health, just in epidemiology and health outcomes. And I thought, Nate made a good point about Eli Lilly's efforts to become more equal in the representation in their U.S. clinical trials. And I mean, I certainly noticed the data disparities. The diseases I work on, I can't even tell you what the representation of people of color in those diseases are, because it's simply not in the literature. One disease that I worked on, the major epidemiology study was done by the Mayo Clinic, and it was done in Olmsted County, which is the county that the Mayo Clinic is in, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, looks a whole lot like Lake Oswego. And so there's, in that disease, there's simply no data. They can't even estimate what the prevalence of the disease in Black or Latinx people are from that study, because there aren't enough of them. Closer to home, when OHSU started its COVID screening, the epidemiological study for the state of Oregon, they recognized that the infrastructure they were building that on had failed to adequately ascertain people of color. And that was actually discussed in sort of the lead up to the presentation to the legislature, but time constraints and such simply didn't do anything about it. And that, as you may know, became somewhat controversial later. There does seem to be some effort now to correct that, but just these legacy building on, that is, the choice of where research is done, the choice of what research systems you use, all of these, I mean, just continuing to use what exists, just to me seems to build and build on the disparities.
We have another question here too, and that is, what's preventing me from taking a more active role in this space? Would love to hear thoughts from the group on that as well.
I think that what's prevented me from participating, or it's scary. You're afraid you're going to say something wrong, do something wrong, and I think we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in order to have these conversations and make them real to affect real change. There are a lot of resources out there to learn from. That's something I've been working on, and to the point of teaching other white people or introducing other white people to those resources to relieve the burden of the education. I'm talking in general terms, of course, not specific to our industry, but
I think that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Anyone else?
Well, I think too, I mean, I cannot speak for my white colleagues. When I say colleagues, female, male, gender, my white colleagues, is that some white people think of this as a zero-sum game, that whatever minorities gain, the majorities lose. And as long as that is part of the conversation, it's really hard to really, make the point. And I know it's a difficult conversation, but I have to say again, my dear white people, you have to start that conversation and educate your colleagues, to surround friends, to say, look, this is good for all of us, and this is why it is good for all of us. Society is very, complex. I mean, they're good and bad in all colors, in all races, in all professions. So that cannot be the stumbling block. I'm so proud of the young people we have, the millennials, at the forefront of this. The older folk, I don't know, because that's the way it's always been, and it's human nature. If what works for you makes you comfortable, why do you want to change it? But the movement has to really be led by my white colleagues and friends, because they can bring the change. These issues have been there for a long, long time. And the issue of clinical trials, I have a clinical trial in my company, University of Washington. I guarantee you, if we're lucky, we're going to enroll one Black person. It's complex. There's a matter of trust, economic insufficiency. They cannot travel to UW. They don't have food. I mean, a lot of things, cause that. So that will not happen overnight. But I think a conscious decision to take it to them, take the clinics, get doctors, white or Black doctors in these communities where they can enroll patients for these trials. To expect them to travel all the time to University of Washington, some of them can't afford to, even if they're not suspicious of the government. So it's going to take a while to get to that point. We have to really make, discrete efforts to do that. Get, Black people, people of color that are familiar with these communities on the leadership teams, the clinicians, nurses, that can go with you, not just them, can go with you, the majority population. So really, we need white people to get on board with this to make it happen. Because this conversation has been going on for so long, and there's an awareness and an awakening that we need to take advantage at this point in time.
Yeah, so in the chat, Doug had referred to Lily Gil-Valletta and her company, CN+, which actually I think I've seen their offering, and I think it has real potential to help with the addition of cultural intelligence to clinical trials, just in terms of helping us design clinical trials, perhaps even locate clinical trials to try to improve the diversity thereof. And I mean, it sounds like Lily has done a ton of work on this, and actually, I mean, seems to have gotten pretty close to representational, which is impressive. And that's certainly something I'd like to learn more about, and how they did that.
That's a great point. And, throughout the conversation, we heard several people bringing up the mentorship, right? Unintended bias, right? And it would be interesting to see what we can do about forming some type of a committee of leadership, mentorship type committee, where we can offer some of those services to the folks within our industry. And Emmanuel, maybe that's something that we can chat a little bit more offline to see if that would be of interest to folks, bringing together some type of an official platform for our companies to reach out to the mentors. Any other thoughts in this area at all? Love to hear from people.
I mean, I don't know what the demographics of this chat room, this room is where we are now, but if I conjecture, there are a lot more white people than there are people of color here, and we really need them to speak because, I mean, like I said, this is not adversarial, and sometimes it's uncomfortable discussion, and just speak up and say why. Then we can, there has to be a conversation to get to the next level. And if there isn't, it's not going to take us anywhere. We have to be frank with each other, say what we think, and it's okay, how do we move forward with this? So if there are white colleagues on this phone call, in this chat room, it's okay. Say what you think. That's the essence of this meeting. You don't have to say yes or agree. If you disagree, let's know why and see, educate each other.
This is Olivia, and I'd like to chime in a little bit. And I think as a woman of color in engineering, I have not found very many mentors of women in color in a lot of places where I've worked. And there's a discomfort and our lack of understanding of minorities in general. And I don't think they know how to approach them or mentor them. I'm not quite sure why I'm not seeing a lot of women in color as mentors, but it would be nice, it would have been refreshing to have someone as a mentor. And what's preventing me from taking more active role in this space, I don't feel empowered a lot of times where I've worked. And I think Caucasians really need to learn more about cultures, not just from a distance. They really need to learn about people in general and all the different cultures. I think the movement with Black Lives Matters, I'm hoping that it makes some sweeping changes in a lot of the companies that are out there to put a lot more people in color in leadership. So a lot more minorities can feel empowered when they are on the job.
So Olivia, my question for you, what is the incentive? I mean, it's okay. I mean, this conversation is clear that there are not enough minorities, they feel disenfranchised. What do you think, I hate to put it this way, what do you think should be in for them to make them think that this is a good idea to go do this, other than the governor said, hire more Black people? I mean, what is the incentive to do this? If the society functions just fine from a majority point of view, why bother? I mean, I talk about commercials, it's very mundane, but really, a lot of these products are used by everybody, people of color, as well as white people. But you never, maybe because I'm in Oregon, you don't see commercials with Black people or people of color. In this, imagine what if you did. Honestly, there would be a sense of ownership that, okay, oh yeah, I'm going to buy whatever it is, a hand lotion, because it's for Black and white people. So that's economic incentive. It may sound crass, but I think for companies that are there to make money, it just seems like, a no-brainer, unless it's the lack of recognition, or not valuing that population. That's why there's no need to reach out to them. But Olivia, I mean, the only way this can happen is if we make it clear to the people hiring these people, what is the benefit? It's not just for humanity. What do they gain by this? And if we can make that clear and there's a buy-in, I think, there are a lot of Black people and people of color that are in these companies, but they don't rise to the point where they are decision makers. And when they get to that point, they're like one in a room of 10. And then try to be too vociferative about your point of view. It's kind of hard when you're in such a room, So we have to work with our white colleagues to get this done. And, it's been there for a long time. It's how do we engage them? I don't know, making them feel guilty is going to work. I think making them understand the value of this is what's important to get to this point. And bringing education early to the kids is a big commitment, not by individuals, by the government. They want to provide more resources to these poor communities, healthcare, the education, the kids. And look at COVID. Right now, there are parents that are well off, black or white, that can afford to hire teachers to teach their kids and get the same quality education or better than they had before COVID. Imagine those communities that don't have those resources. The disparity is going to just get wider and wider. So.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I just have a comment too, you know, talking a little bit about Marian's comments about it being scary to engage in the discussion and sort of even get this moving and what sort of prevents people. I'd highly recommend, if you've never heard of Brene Brown and her work around vulnerability and shame, all you got to do is go to YouTube, look up Brene Brown and vulnerability, and you'll find her very famous TED Talk. She has a follow-on talk discussing shame and how shame, our own personal shame, really drives a lot of, frankly, our personality and our interactions in the world. And frankly, it speaks directly to this conversation about race in our country. It's just a suggestion for folks that, and lastly, I'll say too, that one thing in the conversation that hasn't been there today is, you know, our own upbringing and our own parenting. I mean, I credit my parents with giving me a worldview of openness and working together and sort of collaboration, accepting other people, etc. That's another thing too about if you have a role in parenting and the influence that'll have on your children, even if you're growing up in a community like Portland, it makes a huge, huge difference. So.
Thank you, Andrew. So we have about 30 seconds left before they send us off to the main group. If someone hasn't had an opportunity to share a thought, this would be a great time to do it.
I just wanted to say really quick, you know, something that I think prevents me from taking a more active role tends to be my own arrogance and pride. But in terms of, you know, I'm gay, so I like to think of myself as, you know, quote unquote good at this stuff, and being an ally to these other communities. And so it's hard sometimes to like take a step back and say, you know, center Black and Indigenous people of color's voices and, you know, admit when I'm wrong in those areas.
I think when we have discussions like this, it gets us really hyped and thinking about it in the moment, but then it's just easy to go back to our routine. So I've been doing a really conscious effort to like not forget about it, to seek opportunities to either like volunteer or get more informed about how like the systemic racism has affected the lives of many people, whether you're Black, Hispanic, Native American. But I feel like right now, I recently graduated and I'm interning here at Genentech. And so I feel like, for one, learning their new role, everything that's going on, and then just being an intern, I feel like I don't have a lot of power in what I can do at the like Genentech, for example. So I'm trying to find ways that I can do more.
My name is Madeline. I also work for Genentech. I want to tell you, Naomi, that you can speak up. One of the most powerful things I've learned after working here for 3 years is that speaking up is very important. You need to speak up for what you feel and what you think. It is a safe space. What I've been doing is speaking up. I moved to the Portland area last year in March, and after being here for a year, I had experienced a lot of racism, a lot of comments, and at first I just kind of hid it to myself, but it kind of started to take a toll. So I spoke up and it did make a change. There were a lot of conversations. I've been, you know, speaking to some of my peers about, you know, some of the unbiased comments that they may make, specifically being from the Portland area. They're not used to some of the words or the ways that African American people greet each other. Baby or sweetie or honey, and those are just words of kindness and endearment. But just educating people around you. But if you definitely feel like you feel something, or you want to know something, or you want to learn something or express something, you can speak up. I want you to know that Genentech has made it that it is a safe space for you to never feel like just because you're an intern or you're not higher on a level that you cannot speak up. You do have that safe space to speak.
Lisa, I think those are two very important points I'd like to follow up on. And I think they're really key points, because it's drilling down to what can you do within your sphere of influence. And I think that we're at this really fast, I'm 60 years old. I've seen different moments of societal change in my lifetime. And this is one unlike I've ever seen before in my conscious memory. This is where there's a lot of eyes on these very deep-seated issues that are systemic, and we got to recognize they're systemic. And I think that we, each one of us, need to look within ourselves and our sphere of influence. I mean, both of the preceding speakers, you both have a sphere of influence. You know, me in my role, Don in his role, Nate in his role, Lisa, Bernie. Everybody has to kind of dig down and think, what's my niche? What can I contribute here? And let's think big, and let's think action items. What very specifically can we do to seize this moment in time and make sure it's not another time when we're talking about a problem and acknowledging that a problem exists, but not actually doing something about it. And that's why I'm so grateful to Lisa and Oregon Bioscience Association and Dawn and the other panelists for doing this, because you're the first in the nation that I'm aware of, working in 50 different states, to have had a dialogue like this. It sets a great model, and people speaking up and talking about this event and following it up with some really strategic action items in Oregon, setting an example for a larger stage is mission critical. A lot happens at national levels, but down here in the states, at the state level with the state biotech action, we're closest to the folks who really can affect some change. So thank you. And thank you to Madeline and Noemi for speaking up here.
I would like to just follow up on what Tim said. So thank you. My name's Theresa Bennett. I'm an alliance manager at OHSU. I facilitate collaborations and partnerships between internally and then externally between investigators and pharma. I have for years promoted women in science. And I think here, this is where we can expand and grow, that to include those that aren't as fully represented. When there isn't an access to education, that hurts everybody. And that, I think we can grow that, reaching out to the people of color at the university more actively, and, you know, trying to bring all of these groups together more actively. And I think this little session here has given me a place to grow into. And thank you, Tim, for what you said. And Don, I really appreciate hearing what you've contributed during the session. I think this has moved things along on several levels. So thank you.
I'll follow up on that if that's okay, because there were a couple of things that were noted that I kind of related to, and that being that I've been involved with, well, first of all, my name is Madeline McCarthy. I work in business development for a contract development and manufacturing organization. I work remotely when I'm in Oregon. My organization is based mainly in California, but also globally. So it's been unique for me because much of my network is not Portland-based and not Oregon-based. So it's been interesting to see this discussion or lack of discussion across various spaces. And I have a lot of friends that are in other industries where I'm seeing them have discussions and starting that conversation, whether it be Nike and Adidas, you name it. You're seeing a lot of discussion, and I'm not seeing the discussion in the biotech space. And so there's that. And the other thing I wanted to note is that in relation to supporting women in bioscience, it's been something I've been involved with through an organization called Women in Bio. And one of the themes that I'm seeing is that there are lots of models that can translate, I think, over to this space, and tapping into other groups that have worked on things that have parallels, right? And tapping in and figuring out how those align. The other thing, I'm just sort of throwing it all out there. The other thing to note is that I did live in Maryland for a bit. I went to graduate school in Maryland, and I was involved with middle school science fairs. And I learned that biotech is something that they teach, and they're required to teach starting in 4th grade. And that's not something you see in Oregon. And so if we could elaborate on that and create a safer space for different groups to learn about science, to learn about industry, to create those spaces and those lanes for them to grow into. And I think it's an issue across the board for certain groups. That's my 2 cents.
So Madeline, Bernie Fox. So that last part, I mean, in Maryland, they also teach colonial history to kids, right, in grade school, and you got to go to Annapolis, you do that. So but I think that the opportunity that you mentioned is something that Oregon Bioscience might consider, right? They might consider, given them where teachers are today and doing more remote learning, the ability of some of the talented people in the organization to put together some kind of educational packet that could be used in remote learning on biotechnology and cover some of those areas might be a real plus and might get us score some points as well on the political side by helping out there. Part of what Tim said, you guys all know this, but I'll just say, I guess I'm a year or two older than Tim because I was in an inner city high school in Detroit in '67 when they had the big riot, and then post Martin Luther King's assassination and Bobby Kennedy's assassination in those times, right? But it was very different, right, than what we see today. And so I think there is an opportunity, and I really, really recognize Lisa's contributions to pull this together and bring us together to discuss these topics, because there is an opportunity here that we don't want to let go by. The areas that I'm also thinking about, so I'm the chair of a global community called the World Immunotherapy Council, which is 32 professional medical societies, and we've got outreach to Africa, but we have very little participation from African countries because it's, again, mostly advanced in cancer immunotherapy. But we've been pushing the new president of the Society of the International Union of Immunological Societies is based in Kenya, and we've been working with her to try and do things there to try and bring other students or fellows and give them opportunities. And I'm kind of out of the lane, and maybe Theresa, you're in a better situation at OHSU. While I'm on the faculty at OHSU as an adjunct faculty member and have PhD students, I don't see much in the way of that, and I don't know what the best way is for me to interact there. But I think there are really opportunities, and I know OHSU has had many programs where they have minority students that are given opportunities to come and work in labs in the summertime, and I'm not sure how that's funded, but that's another positive thing, as is that program, which is, I'm blanking the one that OHSU also coordinated for many years, which was the high school students that would come, and we would take them and mentored students, and they came up with some small stipends for students. But the other place I think we have an opportunity, and so for UBVAC realized that, and the NCI told us that we really needed to put some people of color on our clinical trials. And so what we did was reach out to LSU and opened a trial in New Orleans so we could put more easily people of color on. And some of the points that Emmanuel made, which were components of the people don't have the resources to travel and don't have money, we found creative ways to be able to pay cab fare, to pay a hotel so people could stay in town when they had to get overnights and blood draws and do things like that. And I think that even small biotechs can try and scrape by and find some things that can help make it easier to put people of color on your clinical trials. And I that's not a problem for Genentech. I think Genentech does a great job on some of those things, having interacted with them on different clinical trials over the years. But those are things that I think about. And I guess the other point that Emmanuel made, or I'm not sure who made the comment about the Tuskegee experiments, which were incredible stains on the medical research community in the United States, and are taught to everybody who takes any bioethics course and has to annually review that as part of your ethics training, or every couple of years in ethics training. But I think the outreach to the community of color is difficult for people who are white. It's difficult because you are sometimes not able to get across the barrier of color. I was on a flight back to NIH and stopped through Detroit, and I flew back with a professor of color from the University of Michigan, and we were talking about this problem, and she was really admonishing me for not seeking out the Black churches in Oregon and going to them and trying to get a relationship with the minister there so that they could actually have you communicate there. And I think there are opportunities for us to try to build bridges with people's with religious structures and do things like that. But those are all things that I think you can do. I think we've tried to do some of them successfully or less successfully sometimes. But I really think, just thinking what I heard, I think this thing about a training program, trying to bring that next generation up, some kind of educational materials would be something that could be very beneficial for our region.
Bernie, I wanted to kind of add a little bit on what you said. Well, it's sort of a suggestion as I reflect on it. With partnering with the church, and it just reminded me, like, there's like Madeline just mentioned about ways that Black people sometimes greet one another, and one of the things that probably hear on comedy shows or maybe see on TV is like, two Black people walking across one another and giving each other a nod, right? Like, that's recognition, and it has less to do with the color of their skin than their shared experiences. Like, I've never met you, I don't know you from Adam, but I know because of how we're treated in America, we absolutely have some shared experiences, right? And I think that's where that disconnect happens when white folks try to go into these communities and well-meaning and try to enroll people into clinical trials. Yeah, there's some level of mistrust, that is definitely recognized, but there's also a lack of, like, we don't really connect in a way because we have different experiences, right? Like, you can't tell me, it's like the Africa example, right? The reason why cancer research is not that big in Africa is, well, we have other issues that we are worried about. Malaria is still killing people, right? So when people come into the community and telling us about a clinical trial, when, like, people are just trying to find a way to afford lunch, it becomes, what I mean? So I think that's where partnership with people who are in those communities are helpful, because you absolutely have people like all these people on the call who are really passionate in this space and want to make a difference, and partnering with them sort of bridges that gap, so that the intent and the information and the positives coming out of that trial are translated in a way that relates a little more to the community that is being seeked out here. And to Naomi, I wanted to add that so in terms of, like, what can we do, like, one of the things that I try to do is, like, the little things, grassroots, right? When we think about the impact of COVID-19 on marginalized communities, one of the issues that people miss is the financial impact. When we think about the economic relief package, it's gone to small businesses and it's gone to individuals, right? Well, if most of the small businesses are owned by white folks in America, how is then definitely the financial impact of COVID-19 is greater in those marginalized communities. So even in legislation, when we're deciding how to help communities, we're not really reflecting on what those communities need. We just cut a check and send it out and spread it equally. But then, well, that is still going to benefit one community much more than another community, right? So even when we're not thinking about, like, testing, and this reflects itself on testing, on everything. So while we're going through this pandemic and in general, right, like, you can make conscious decisions on what, supporting more Black businesses, right? Raising your voice and talking to people has more impact than you can realize. Just like having this uncomfortable conversation, getting on this call truly, truly has impact. Because for one, the fact that there are, so many people on this call makes me feel valued, because I know the issues that we're discussing are truly impactful to me, right? Like, like a lot of people could, white people could live their lives and not be as impacted by the, disparities that Black and brown communities suffer, right? But you choose to be on the call to educate yourself, to share your perspective. So I think having those conversations also in your community are helpful, right? Because a lot of people also avoid the conversation. They won't get on the call. You're not the only one that saw the email, right? But you probably have friends who saw this email and said, yeah, that's not really, something that I can get involved with. So I think I encourage people to have uncomfortable conversations around them so that they can, raise more awareness and give people more opportunities to share an opinion, even if that opinion is dissenting to what you think, so that you can have a conversation, however comfortable, that will hopefully bridge, our differences, so that we can all together work, because this is not a Black people problem, right? And it is definitely not a problem that Black people can solve. So we need to bring on all those people who have dissenting opinions, or who are not, finding the courage or the motivation to be involved and to be active in the space.
I can, first of all, hello everyone. My name is David. I'm also a frontline employee at Genentech, and I've also sometimes struggled with working out what's the best way for me to have an impact, considering I'm not managing other people. And one of the things I've been trying to do is making sure that when I ask for second opinions from colleagues, I'm asking a diverse range of colleagues and not just the same people over and over again. And that if I say offer assistance to new hires, I make sure that I'm doing that equally. I stop and think at the end of the day, all right, who did I reach out to today? Who did I try to help? And just check in with myself and make sure that that's a diverse group. The other thing is, I feel that it's important to stay engaged with the Black Lives Matter movement online and outside of work, so that I can constantly be learning and bring anything that I learned there back to my work.
Can't hear you, Lisa.
Sorry, I'm kind of watching the clock and expecting us to be swooped into the back to the big group any minute now. But before that happens, is there anybody else in this group that wants to share?
This is Madeline again. I wanted to say that I do admire the thought of building the educational growth and sharing that, but I do believe that in African American community, it should start before universities. The reason why is because the marginalized, the way that in the African American household, when you're going home, you may not have as much as someone else, and as much as encouragement, confidence building. So those teachings starting a little bit younger, maybe like in the high school years, would be more beneficial, because it builds that confidence that I can do this, because it's not only just the knowledge, but just thinking that, just believing in yourself is kind of hard sometimes growing up in the neighborhoods that you're growing up in. You kind of become a product of your environment. But if you have an outside environment where you can see something totally different and see a separate option, you may be likely to choose that instead.
I'd like to see it in grade school. I mean, I saw a tweet the other day where a guy developed a CAR T cell using Legos, right? So it was a way to try and, which is a really innovative cancer therapy that's been approved by the FDA, right? So I think there's so much to be learned or taught to young people.
Yeah, thank you. You know, one of the things, and I appreciate, do you say Naomi?
Noemi, yeah.
Noemi? Noemi. Yeah. I appreciate the point that you made in the very beginning. Like, you know, it's great that we host this event, we come to these events and, you know, have these conversations, but then we leave and we go back and we're busy with our day-to-day lives and we kind of get sucked back into the routine. So being very intentional about some of the things that we can do as individuals. And Bernie, your name came up quite a bit as we were preparing for this panel, as someone in Emmanuel's network, one of our panelists, who he felt like you did a great job, at least with him, of expanding your network to include, to be very inclusive. And whether that's because you had common interests in terms of therapeutic areas or what that was very beneficial to him. And I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about individually is just being very intentional about my networks and trying to increase them, increase the level of diversity and inclusion in my personal network. So just wanted to share that. And I think that we did get sort of the 30-second warning here. So feel free to jump in, anyone, but we might get swooped out.
Well, just comment. It's not just people of color, right? It's the male-female ratios, and I think several of the societies I've been involved in have worked very, very hard to put women in positions of where they can control programmatic type efforts at a scientific level. So, but I'm very nice of him to say that.
I know we're going to get kicked out any second, but I did just want to note that, I think for me, it would be great if whatever the follow-up or the takeaway from, I was really encouraged to see people join this discussion. I honestly didn't expect that many, so maybe I'm just out of touch, but way to, with a follow-up, like seeing this go somewhere and really feeling like this is a path for me to become more active in this space would be great. So that's something that I would be looking for. And I think a lot of people would be willing to become more involved.
Can everyone hear me? Great.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. It's 1 o'clock. I want to be respectful of our time. We had intended to do a group share out at this point in the meeting today. And I think I'll allow some time for that, but I want to allow people that have to jump off and just let you know that we will download with each of the breakout room facilitators after the fact and communicate back out with everyone who's participated in today's event with what our next steps are and some of the salient points that came out of these breakout group sessions. I know we had a great conversation in ours. So before I let that sharing happen and before too many people drop off, just want to give another big thank you to Amgen and Oregon Alliance of Clinical Researchers. Great big thank you to you both for allowing this conversation to happen. And let's do some quick share outs. And Diane, who from your room would you like to do that?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, yeah, I can go ahead. I took some notes and I can go ahead, and Nate joined me, and Athena and Lakeisha and Riley and Mandy. We had a really good group, and Radhika had a great conversation. So what we discovered is that the most important thing is not to be afraid to speak up and speak out. That was the running theme through, and it's taken some courage. For some of us who we talked about in our room, it took some courage to make some changes in our work groups and at our workplace. And it's can be a fearful thing to be able to do that. And then also, talked about, well, you don't look, one of our group members got told she didn't look like she was part of the culture that she came from. So someone assumed that someone should look a certain way when they came from the country she came from. And then and so we talked about how we can show up and be an ally. Nate gave some great examples of how he has brought equity and diversity to and worked with faith-based groups in the community to affect change, to prevent people from becoming diabetic. And so using a lot of culturally sensitive programs to do that. So that's a really good stepping off point for us. And then making the conscious decision to stand up, speak out, speak up, speak out, and what it means to be able to not be afraid to do that, but to make the decision and to make the commitment. And we talked about how if each of us make a commitment, that change will and is happening.
Great, thanks Diane for sharing. Julie, do you want to give us some quick points from your group? think you're on mute.
Yep, sorry, took me a while to get to unmute. Yeah, I think the biggest part for our group was really talking about, having that difficult conversation, right? And Emmanuel, if you would like to jump in on anything that you want to add to that, please feel free. But I think that was a really big piece of it. And Emmanuel, please feel free to jump in if there's something you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard Diane talk about speaking up. I think speaking up sometimes can be, I like to think of it as educating, your colleagues, your friends, because people are speaking out, but nobody's listening. So part of that process, the education, is to be able to get the difficult conversations going and then try to make the point why this benefits all of us. And as I said, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not if I win, you lose, or it's not even winning. It's about humanity and also getting the best out of this society, which is the best country in the world. That's why people like me left to come here. So in spite of what's going on here, I would not want to be anywhere else but in America, and it's very reassuring that this conversation has gone to the point where you have people on the streets in Portland. I'm so impressed. It's mostly white people, they don't have to, but that awareness is coming. And I think that, let's get out of our bubble and have those conversations, and educate.
Thank you. So we're 1:05 and we've got just one more group to go here. Appreciate you guys hanging on. Don, do you mind just doing a quick wrap up from our session?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the themes that were captured, but I liked a couple of things that I really liked was Noemi mentioned, just the wondering about what can we do, like what can someone, let's say at a low level in a hierarchical chain at a company, what impact can they have? How can they change minds? And then and the idea was that those conversations, being involved, making a deliberate effort, consciously, intentionally staying in this moment. Don't let the moment fade, right? Because at the end of the day, when these protests stop, right, happening or die down a little bit, we're still going to be living in our black skins, right? So if there's no significant change, to how policing happens, how our communities are marginalized, how, we have less access to education, to good jobs, then it would have been for naught, right? And I think this moment is pretty significant. I think both Bernie and Tim shared that, like, they haven't seen a movement this significant, right? And I agree with that. So we talked about how to stay in that moment and leverage this for bigger impact. And another thing that someone else in the group, Madeline, reflected on was when we think about, access to education and impacting, let's say elementary schools with larger percentage of people of color. She talked about really starting early, so that you're understanding that, kids who are coming from dysfunctional families or more difficult backgrounds or communities may not have the support structure that other kids may benefit from. And we're not just talking about technology, we're talking about encouragement. We're talking about, being able to eat when you go home, right? We're talking about, not just trying to survive and getting your first job. And I think this is, a lot of times when college students who are first generation, and I touched this on a little bit, is that the dropout rate for first generation college students is really, really, really high. And the reason for that is that even though they're making every effort to make it through, they don't have those wraparound services. They don't have that support. They don't, a college education may not be as important to your parent if your parent didn't go to college. And they might have other things to worry about, like paying the bills or putting food on the table. So, starting early helps encourage those students so that they can try to continue and work hard, and they can see what they can become. They can look at people on this call who are, really highly accomplished in their fields and also really passionate about this space, and see that, I belong, in this crowd. so that they can continue working hard. And ultimately, that's what's going to change the numbers and then bring diversity and inclusion in the process.
Great, thank you. Soundharya, I know you and Emily were together in a group. Did one of you want to share?
Yeah, I'm going to let Emily share. I think we were mostly, intent was a big conversation on our side, how we had to be intentional. But I think I'll let Emily share, the theme of the group.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, quickly, just to reiterate that, we talked a lot about the importance of being active and intentional in every aspect of your life, from buying and supporting from Black-owned businesses to mentoring, not only mentoring within the life science industry, but across the board. And also in terms of choosing and selecting your hiring candidates. And we had a great conversation around choosing and selecting board members and having diversity on company boards. We also had some really honest and open conversation about the second question on preventing people from taking more active roles in this space. And I think that we all acknowledge that there's a lot to learn, and that it's easy to be afraid of saying the wrong thing or making mistakes. But allyship is a lifelong journey, and sometimes making those mistakes are the way that you do learn and become better. So I think we had a great conversation around intent and just learning.
I think those are great points to end this conversation on. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you again to Nate, Emmanuel, Dawn, Soundharya, everybody who joined us today. Again, this is the first in a series of what we're going to do to help address and make an impact on this issue. So stay tuned for more. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks to everyone who hung out with us for an extra 10 minutes. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.